वेलकम एवरीवन मॉल्टन विमेन काउंसिल के फ्राइडे सेशन में। आज का सेशन तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, दैट्स व्हाई आई एम लुकिंग सम न्यू पीपल हियर एज वेल। इससे पहले कि हम सेशन की बात करें, तो आप लोगों ने, अच्छे बच्चों ने फ्लायर देखा है? मेरा एक ही क्वेश्चन होता है, हाथ खड़ा करें किस किसने फ्लायर देखा है?
पिछले वाला जो अब आज वाला
आज वाला। सो कमलजीत जी, उसके ऊपर लिखा हुआ है सवेरा स्किल्स बिल्डिंग वर्कशॉप। सो व्हाट इज सवेरा? सो सवेरा जो है मॉल्टन विमेन काउंसिल का एक प्रोजेक्ट है, एंड सवेरा स्टैंड्स फॉर साउथ एशियन विमेन एम्पावरमेंट एंड इक्वालिटी ऑफ राइट अलायंस। हम लोगों ने ये प्रोजेक्ट शुरू किया और इस प्रोजेक्ट में हम लोगों ने वो खवातीन, वो औरतें जो डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस में किसी ना किसी तरह इन्वॉल्व थी, वो सर्वाइवर्स, उनकी एक्सपर्टीज से हमने पूछा हम आगे आने वालों को कैसे बचा सकते हैं, कैसे एजुकेट कर सकते हैं, कैसे सपोर्ट कर सकते हैं, क्या कर सकते हैं उनके लिए। सो वी हैव मैनी डिस्कशंस, फोकस ग्रुप्स, और वहां से बहुत से उन्होंने बताया कि ये स्किल्स अगर प्रोवाइड की जाएं, कम्युनिकेशन, टाइप ऑफ एंगर, हाउ टू कम्युनिकेट वेल, इस तरह की बातें, क्योंकि वो सारा बेस कर रहा है जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस, जेंडर बेस्ड डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, चेंजिंग द जेंडर नॉर्म्स। जैसे अभी वनीता ने बात की है, बहुत से लोगों के पास ये ऑप्शन नहीं थी अपने हाथ में अपने डिसीजंस रखने की। वो क्यों नहीं थी हमें नहीं पता। तो उसी में एक हमारा वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट काम हम लोगों ने जो उसमें सवेरा में किया है, वी आर एंगेजिंग मेन एंड बॉयज। तो अगर आप हमारा इंटरनेशनल वुमेन डे का फ्लायर देखें, March 12th, it will be in Malton Community Center, Hall A, from 12 to 4 o'clock. I request everybody to come over there because we are trying to engage men and boys to just end this gender-based violence, which is not easy, I know, because सदियों से यही होता आ रहा है। मर्द भी चेन है, औरत भी चेन है। कहाँ से वो चेन टूटनी है, कहाँ से वो नई चीजें मिलेंगी। So we are trying our best. It will be a panel discussion. We have 4 panelists on that day, and they are all going to talk about this. So it will be great to see you all over there as well. Today our host is Tushita, and I'm going to read about her. Tushita is with Malton Women Council for, I think now, for the last 1 decade, right?
Yeah.
Almost, yeah. So Tushita is a socialpreneur, advances gender justice, upholds human dignity, and prevents labor trafficking by advocating policy, systematic changes to help build awareness, capacity, and resilient community. Over to you, Tushita.
Thank you, Uzma. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's almost a decade because that's the time I came to Canada, and since the time I've come, I was introduced to Aloka ji and then to you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to welcome all of you who are here present for the session. It is a very special session. We'll have lots of learning, and I have been given the task of, introducing our lovely guest speaker today. So while researching to introduce our presenter for today, I realized I need to up my researching. She is no ordinary person. Now I know why Uzma too was struggling to put things together when I asked her to give me some details about our presenter. I hope I'm able to do justice. It's an absolute honor to be introducing such a rare individual. Some of her supervisors have said that. Dr. Vinita Puri is a registered social worker specializing in industrial psychology. She has supported diverse population working with ease at organizations as diverse as the hospitals, correctional facilities, educational institutions, addiction recovery treatment centers and regulatory bodies. Dr. Vinita's out-of-the-box approach has made her a much sought-after person in the social sector. Being a socialpreneur myself, working on human labor trafficking, I understand and value the wraparound services our frontline workers provide, and Dr. Vinita does just that. A great team player, she has worked well with diverse communities and populations, providing support to at-risk and vulnerable clients. She's always well respected and liked not only by her colleagues, but more importantly, her clients. Like a professional author who always wears a creative hat, Dr. Vinita is a true storyteller, weaving theories into real life practices. Like a magician, she draws tools from her toolbox that are not only effective, but also outcome oriented. Again, something which her supervisors have said. You know, I've drawn things to introduce you, Vinita, from a lot of things that Uzma shared and some which I guessed you have. Known to be delivering as promised, they say, she knows her stuff. When I was told Dr. Vinita would be delivering a session under Savera to help us get an insight into understanding and confronting gender-based discrimination at workplace, wow, it's a huge topic. It reminded me of the story of the two cats and a monkey, where both the cats were fighting over bread. I thought workplace discrimination may also be something like your job is better than mine, but oh, I was so wrong. And now I hand it over to Dr. Vinita Puri, who will tell us so much more about workplace discrimination, something which we should all know. Thank you, Vinita, and go ahead.
Thank you. So kind of you. I'm speechless. It's really, honestly, I'm very humbled and grateful to be here. I don't, even though I've done all these things, I don't see myself as being magical or extraordinary in any way at all. I am very privileged, really, that I was raised, because this is where it starts. I was raised in a family that is sick, right? So we believe in equality. We believe in everybody is the same. That's the first thing I was ever taught, is that we are all the same, all different religions, all different genders, all different races, everyone, but everyone has God in them, right? Ekomkar. And that is my first core value. And no matter what I do in life, I stay true to that, right? I see everybody as equal. I don't see one person has a PhD, one person has a community college diploma. It doesn't matter about that, because those are societal appraisals of who's good enough and who's able. And it means maybe that they had more access to money to go to school. Maybe they had more opportunities. Maybe they had more challenges. We don't know people's life story. So I never judge anyone. I truly think we're all the same. And I wanted to start this talk with that question for everyone here, is when we hear the word equality, what does that actually mean? Because sometimes I hear feminists say, well, I believe in feminism, but feminism for some people means that, women should have more power now and men should be down. And that's not equality, is it? No. Equality means everybody is the same, period. And so I'm so glad to hear that for the event, and men are encouraged and men are here today, because gender-based violence is a problem for everybody, not just for women, for everybody. Because for men who are stereotyped as being bad and oppressive and hurtful to women, not all men are like that. Not all men are bad people and who are oppressive towards women. That is just not true. right? Perhaps historically, culturally, for certain reasons, they were taught that, you know what, this is what we should do. We should dominate. And, you know, that hasn't happened everywhere. We do know in First Nations cultures, even in our Indian culture, I mean, look at Durga, right? Durga is a powerful goddess. And so, you know, in historical literature, there were different times in history when women had a lot of power and were given a lot of respect. And for whatever reason, that might have changed. But, you know, power changes hands all the time in different ways. So I want everyone to take a minute. Maybe you can write it on a piece of paper. Maybe you can think about it in your mind. But I want you to think of the word equality. I also want you to think of the word feminism, what that means. And even the word gender, because we talk about it as there's men and there's women. But I feel like now there is an appreciation that gender is diverse. There are some people who don't neatly fit as men and women, right? So when we're speaking, I think it would be nice to also share our pronouns, if you know what I mean by that. So my name is Vinita, and I go by she and her. So for somebody else, they might say I'm they and them. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with those pronouns or those concepts or how people talk about themselves. I know that's in English, but what I think in our culture, in you know, in Hindi and Punjabi, in Eastern cultures too, there is that appreciation of just when you say tusi, or, you know, versus tu, you're talking to somebody at your level, or you're talking with somebody with respect. There's different ways of communicating respect and hierarchy. And I'm just wondering how that affects the way that we see ourselves, right? Because from a spiritual point of view, I'm going to talk spiritual because that's how I am. This is how my mind works. So if we're all part of God, if we're all part of the same energy, is God a man or a woman? Is God, you know, black or white or brown? No, because those are human attributes. And if we're talking about equality, we're talking about equality like from that spiritual standpoint, that higher perspective, higher consciousness. So just for a few examples, hi Prabha, can anyone share an example of when I say the word equality, what does that mean to you? What thoughts come to mind? What feelings come to mind? And remember, thoughts and feelings are two different things. I'm talking from a psychology perspective. So thoughts is how we appraise ourselves. So it's logic, it's you know, thinking, and you know, whereas feelings is how I feel intuitively. It's not necessarily logical or practical. Two different things. So when you give your response, there's no right or wrong. I want to be clear. No right or wrong, because it's a subjective experience. When I speak for myself. You know, I say, I feel equality is this. It doesn't mean you have to agree with me. Okay, so diversity in perspective is okay. So can anyone share their thoughts, initial thoughts of the word equality and feminism?
Vinita, I'll just before we go further, I just wanted to tell, for the benefit of the participants, that in case you have any questions, just put it in the chat box.
Yes,
I should have said that at the beginning.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No
So please put it in the chat box. We'll take it up with Vinita probably at the end of the session, if it's okay, Vinita.
Well, actually, even throughout, it's okay if people would like to ask questions. I will pause at certain places, and I'll say, okay, does anybody have any questions? But this is sort of like, in a way, an icebreaker, a teaser, just a way for us to get our juices flowing about this topic. Yeah, go ahead, Shanta.
Equality, I understand as everybody's taken, looked after equal. You perceive everybody equal, whether they're children, old people, younger, any gender, doesn't matter. That's how I perceive. If I want to be treated some way, we have to treat other people same way, equally, equal thing on a collective basis.
Okay, very nice, very nice, very nice. So, so perception is a big, word that you said, perception. So look at glasses, okay? So this is how I see the world. These are my glasses, my perception. Somebody else might have a different pair of glasses. So who is actually right and who's wrong? Well, it's the eye of the beholder, right? Just like me saying something is beautiful or not beautiful, it's that perception. So that's very nice. I appreciate that. And so one follow-up question for everyone is, where do we learn that from? Like I shared, I learned my, core value is Ekomkar. For me, it came from my family. And
From parents, when you grow up.
Yeah. So parents shape us. What else shapes us aside from our parents? What else influences the way we think and perceive and even view ourselves, right? For me to think I'm a beautiful woman or an ugly person, like how do I learn that stuff?
The society.
Yeah, so those messages come from television. These days, kids are bombarded with social media. So people are comparing themselves. Oh, look, this person looks like this. I should look like this. I'm starting to see a lot of men as well having eating disorders now, wanting to have the six-pack, and there's a lot of pressure on men now equally to look a certain way. So, you know what I mean? Like a lot of imagery and messaging and communication is faster now, and it's also more global now. So these things do make a difference. I'm seeing the chat box, culture, religion, social media. That's right. And the interesting thing is some of these messages are conflicting, right? So let's say I grow up learning that it's beautiful to be a little bit chubby and whatever, and I'm seeing Western stuff and it's skinny and light skin, and right, so I'm getting two different messages. And so what does that do to my mind? It's a tug of war, right? And so that can cause a lot of challenge, but there's an opportunity when cultural values and ideas and thoughts and things like that are not the same. It makes a human being question, well, what is the truth then? Right? Otherwise, if everyone said the same thing, you would just think this is reality. This is perception. This is how it is. Right? So this is an opportunity. I just wanted to start off with that. And now I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So today, basically we started with just introductions and checking in with you. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about discrimination. So when I talk about these things, I'm talking from a legal perspective, what the law says, how the law defines things like harassment and discrimination and prejudice. And then I'm going to give us some case examples of what that could look like in the workplace. Then I'm specifically going to go into the Human Rights Code in Ontario and what the employer's obligations are. It wasn't always like this, but just like with any social change, it requires people advocating and keep bringing these cases to the forefront. If we stay silent, if we don't say anything, then nothing will change. But what I feel is so important about these skills building workshops is that we have a standardized way of viewing and, say, oh, we're all wearing the same glasses in terms of how we feel about this, all our values in terms of equality, justice. That's why I started with that discussion, because if we don't have the same mission, vision, values, we can't make it work, period. Okay. So I'm an organizational psychologist. What does that mean? I start from a systems perspective. My background is I started in sociology and social work. So I don't see just individual things. I see macro systems stuff. Okay. So what are the barriers? What are the challenges? What are the structures in our society that affect the way we perceive the world? Right? So that is really important. So the Human Rights Code, what structure developed the Human Rights Code in Ontario? Does anybody know? Which governmental body is responsible? Who makes the laws in our society? Who decides who's a criminal, who's innocent, who's the person who mentioned, is it Kamaljeet who works with trafficking? Or no, Tashita, you work with with trafficked victims, right? And so when I did a research study actually on the sex trade, sex workers and the sex trade, and there's so much shame and stigma around that. But at the same time, it is the oldest profession in the world. And if it's not decriminalized, right, it's controversial, but if the work is not decriminalized, those women cannot reach out for help from the police. And then what? Then you have more people who are not going to report and who are going to be exploited. So what's the answer, right? So does anyone make any comments? I see some questions in the chat box already. Okay. So let's start with our first common definition. That's important. So the word harassment. What is that? What's harassment? Anybody? First, I want to get what you know, and then I'm going to tell you what the government thinks it means or says it is.
So Vinita, उर्दू में एक वर्ड है हरासा करना. It means डराना किसी को.
अच्छा.
So जब हम harassment सुनते हैं तो हमारे ज़हन में वो उर्दू का वर्ड आता है. किसी को डराना.
Well, it's similar, right? So fear is definitely a part of harassment, isn't it? It's a good kind of analogy.
I think Kamaljeet,
it's a kind of bullying.
Okay.
Yeah.
ते आप example भी दे सकते हो what it looks like, but
so Darshan Mutta ji, after you, Kamaljeet ji.
So harassment, violence होता है या different होता है?
It could be both.
Yes,
It's both.
जो harassment है ना, उसको हम ये कह सकते हैं कि unnecessarily किसी को तंग परेशान करना. कई बार उसका कसूर भी नहीं होता है, तो उस पर कमेंट करे जाओ, आप अच्छे लगते हो या बुरे लगते हो, या being of the particular sex. आमतौर पर जो है हमारी सोसाइटी में होता है कि लड़का लड़की को, बॉयज गर्ल्स को परेशान करते हैं, हालांकि उनका उसमें कोई कसूर भी नहीं होता है.
ते क्यों परेशान करते हैं? Like मतलब in terms of just social norms होता है, right? So why do men, or anyone, women can harass men too, let's be honest, but why would they would laugh and think it's not a big deal, because maybe they were taught that it's normal, like, being a murd means this is what you do. Like, it's, you bug women. Like, it's not a big deal. Why is she making a big deal about it? Right? Like, minimizing her feelings is seen as normal, and it's not seen as an act of violence, right? To harass a woman.
Be mean karna usko, दूसरे को.
Mhm.
That may not be the sexual harassment, that's just a physical or mental harassment भी हो सकता.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
Harassment could also mean that if you tell me something which I don't want to hear, I don't want to listen to, but you still are telling me, or forcing me into listening to it, that could also be harassment.
Yeah, so just a tang karna kisi ko, right? So so we look at the picture on the right, and you see why she didn't report. So why did the lady not report the harassment? Any thoughts?
Sometimes you're also hushed down from, you're not allowed to speak up.
By who?
Could be your peer, could be your family, could be
Yes.
people around you.
Exactly. So this goes back to values again, right? So if I think it's normal in my culture, like normal to, it's just fun chasing girls and bugging them, and it's not a big deal. Like, if that's normalized, then it's not a problem. And then the girl might actually start questioning herself and say, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe this is normal. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Right? And then the family and other people might, and even I've heard this, when we think about honor-based violence, which we'll talk about as well, sometimes the family actually blames the victim and says, you know what? Maybe she was dressed inappropriately and flirty and, trying to do it like a game. And, she made him want to rape her or harass her or something like that, right? We've heard those kinds of stories. So, so why didn't I report it? So it's a good question. Maybe she didn't want to shame her family. Maybe she didn't want to cause a big thing and people uska mazak urate, there'd be some consequence. So maybe she kept her mouth shut. Maybe she wouldn't be believed if she went to the police. Maybe they would say, okay, and in the workplace, and to file a complaint, sometimes you might think your colleagues or your employer, people will know what happened to you, and people gossip, people talk. Right? So lots of reasons. We have a question in the chat box.
Shanta has also said that maybe she's scared to speak up in the society, so that is why it's not reported.
Exactly. Okay, so according to the Ontario Human Rights Code, harassment are any comments, okay, any actions. So it's not necessarily verbal, it could be just an action. Let's say I'm winking at you, or I'm making gestures or something. Anything that's an unwelcome action is defined as something that any reasonable person, I want you to write this word down, reasonable person, 2 words actually, reasonable person. This is what the law usually says when they define limits and boundaries for what is okay to do. Now, what is a reasonable person? What does that mean? It's a very vague term. to say a reasonable person. Is it not? So that's why sometimes in court cases, it's a bit tricky, right? But if you say some things that are overt gestures, right? If the person was overtly flirting with you and overtly doing something, do you know what I mean by overt and covert? So some things are subtle, and then maybe it could be that she read too much into it, or he read too much into it, right? Maybe there wasn't actually something going on, but the person was maybe being too sensitive, but you need proof to show that. So it is tricky still, okay? But reasonable person, make note of that, please. The other thing is harassment can be found to exist even if the harasser is not aware of his or her behavior. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so let's say let's say you're just a nice person, and this can happen. You're just a friendly person. You know, you like to give hugs to people. You're just open person, right? And in this society, for example, maybe when you first came here, people hear a bit more, why is this person touching me, and why are they being like this? So people might think that's not normal, but what is normal for in one culture, maybe not in another culture, right? And so the person might not be aware that what their actions are actually making someone uncomfortable. Can that happen? It can happen. It can be a genuine misunderstanding, but I would say harassment is the idea that even though you've told the person, you know what, I'm not comfortable. So it's up to also the victim. You have to tell the person, stop. I am not comfortable with you coming into this space. I don't like it when you do this, this, and this. It takes some assertiveness to do that. Not everybody might feel comfortable depending on who you're talking to, right? So if it's your boss, it's your colleague, if it's somebody that, you know, you're saying, okay, boss, I don't like it when you touch me like this, when you explain something to me, it makes me uncomfortable. You have to expressly say that. I would say, try if you can to document as much as possible. So in email I think is the best way, honestly, because email things are recorded, exchanges and communication. It shows the date, the time that the person responded. So if you say, just wanted to clarify that, certain things have made me feel uncomfortable. Even though email's not, people don't think is the ideal way, it's better than not having any record that conversation happened, because otherwise somebody can say it never happened. She never told me to stop, right? And then what do you do? Right? So does anybody have any question right now?
No questions still.
Okay, good. So basically the person might not genuinely be aware, but once it's in their awareness, this person has told me they're uncomfortable. And if I keep bugging you, okay, that is a problem. That's a harassment. And we need to make note of how frequently, how often it was ignored. That is very, very essential for the courts, okay? So experience of microaggressions, I want to talk about this for a second, microaggressions versus aggression. So some of us have already talked about aggression, right? When you hear in English aggression, just when you were saying gussa or like fear, or you're talking about what certain words mean, right? So how would we translate aggression in Hindi or Punjabi or Urdu? Like, what is the closest verbiage for that when you're describing to somebody? Usually it sounds to me like a physical description, right? When somebody is just a mar deo, right? Mar deo, so that's like actual physical action, but this is not necessarily physical. Aggression is not always physical, na? So Jake is Durana to see, right? Durana is instilling fear in someone, and that's psychological emotional abuse. Hana? So it's not necessarily physical. But Jay, if you had your boss and he was like, well, you know, you might not have your job if you don't do this favor for me or something, then I mean, that threat or that fear of losing your job or the gossip that could happen if people found out. These are things that are not physical, but are they not painful? Right? It's still aggression. It's still considered aggression according to the Human Rights Code. Na? For example, like for the aggression. So we're going towards what we call microaggression. Micro matlab small, chota, right? So you have big aggression and small aggression. Big aggression is like kisinumarna, right? Like the right chagra, like a physical fight, something like that, right? Overt. The micro is more subtle. In subtle ways, you try to control someone. So write the word power down. We're going to do an exercise later on power. Power can be expressed in different ways, right? Power is about control. So if I try to control you, I can control you in what way? I can try to scare you. I can try to intimidate you. I can insult you, put you down, you know, say like really bad things to you to make you shame and feel bad. Like anything that can bring someone down. Sometimes it's raising your voice. Sometimes it's, you know, different things. कोई और example है क्या किसको?
ऑफिस में ज्यादा होता है ना माइक्रो एग्रेशन.
हाँ, माइक्रो मतलब छोटा.
ऑफिस में भी होता है and real life मतलब घर में भी होता है.
घर में भी होता है.
It could be passive aggressive also. Sometimes people are not aggressive as such. You don't see anything. They'll be passive aggressive towards you.
So passive aggressive का क्या मतलब है?
They are aggressive, but not visually. You can't see anything, but the way they are making you feel guilty and making you.
Yes, guilt is emotional abuse. Yeah, exactly. So there's different ways people do it. People are very creative when it comes to how can I harass someone? How can I intimidate someone? How can I scare someone, make them, bribe them into doing what I want them to do? People are very creative at this stuff, right? But the key thing here is that consent is very, 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 very important feature here, okay? Meaning that maybe it started off where, you know, we were friends, we started to flirt mildly or whatever, but then I decided that, okay, I don't want this now. So then I say, okay, this person's harassing me, right? So you have to be very careful. You have to be honest as well and say, look, like, did I agree to those things? Like, did I say, yes, sure? This is where it becomes very, very tricky. Right? Because we know sometimes people might consent. Matlab, consent, matlab, say, tika, you know, I'm okay with it. But they might not be okay with it. So why would somebody say they're okay with something when they're not okay with something? We've already actually talked about this, but why would I say I'm okay if I'm not?
Being afraid of him.
Hanji, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the dir thing again, right? So that's a huge thing. Scared of lots of things, scared of shame, dishonor to family, shame to myself, don't want to be labeled as an overly sensitive person.
Sometimes sometimes I may not be able to say that also, even if I'm,
Exactly.
I mean, even if I'm not, I'm scared, or maybe I'm not scared, but I can't say, I'm not used to it. Vinita, there's one question.
Sure.
Would exploitation of newcomers by their employers be an example of microaggression?
I think so, 100%. I would say it's aggression, actually. And exploitation is a very strong word, right? So, would anyone like to give an example? What does that look like? If I'm being exploited by employer as a newcomer, what is that?
Taking advantage of?
Yeah, but like
Yes.
how?
Not paying them equal
Salary.
amount of money, or
Yes.
making them work more hours than they are needed to. It
Yeah.
can be any way.
Absolutely. 100%. That's like not even micro. That's like, that is aggression. It's wrong, right? It's just, and it's against the law, frankly. I mean, you don't pay somebody when they earn that money. That's wrong, right? And that is discrimination. If you are, let's say, paying somebody and treating them well, who's from Canada, who's white, who's, from here versus a new person, then you're treating people unequal. It goes back to the inequality thing that we were talking about before. So, no, good point.
And oh, sorry for interrupting. And
Yeah.
that also means that's labor exploitation, actually.
Oh, 100%.
So, yeah.
That exploitation is like slavery. It's like, it's wrong. Like, there's nothing micro about that. And it's good we're having this conversation, because people don't know sometimes how to label things, but think about it. Like, that's slavery. Like, you're not getting paid for your labor.
Also hours भी कम देना, वो भी आ जाता है ना work में.
Their request or their suggestions are neglected,
Yes.
ignored, you can say.
Ignore.
That is a form of abuse. Neglect.
Yeah.
If anyone has ever seen the Power and Control wheel, has anyone ever seen the Power and Control wheel? I encourage you to do it if you haven't seen that. Maybe another time I can do a session on power and control and exploitation, but neglect, ignoring someone when they're telling you this is your right, and they ignore. Even at home, if you tell your husband or your wife something and they ignore you, or somebody's neglecting their responsibilities, that's abuse, actually, right? Like, or just being quiet when you're telling them, you're crying, you're saying, I need this, and they're just ignoring you. Like, who cares, right? So that's abusive. That means you don't matter. Your voice is not being heard. That is abusive, right? So that's really important that we're having this conversation, because the more we are better at identifying how power plays out. Like I said, people are very creative with how they abuse power and oppress people. So my whole career has been spent on understanding, why do some people control other people? And I mean, it's, there's so many explanations for it, but it's human nature to some degree, why people do that throughout time. People have war, people find ways to do things, right? But that's a separate issue. So let's get back to sexual harassment here. So these are terms that are actually from the Ontario Human Rights Code. This is not my terminology. This is how they define it. So sexual harassment, and why are these terms important, everyone? So we talked about this before, right? You need a mission, vision, values. If you're going to be on the same page, you need definitions that everybody understands. Because if everyone has a different definition or a different perception, then this is not going to work. Okay, so it refers to comments or actions, we talked about this in the last slide, based on sex or gender that are unwelcome, big word, unwelcome, and reasonably known to be unwelcome. So that goes to the reasonable persons clause that we talked about. So what would a reasonable person say? Again, that's a very vague question, because what is reasonable, I don't know. But that's for a judge to decide. Usually the judge looks at the evidence, and in their subjectivity, they make that decision, right? My whole PhD thesis has been on judicial decision-making and how do judges reach conclusions because they're people as well. So research has shown that sexual harassment often involves, as I was saying, the misuse of power and dominance. Usually it escalates over time and is commonly known to exist within workplaces when it occurs. So why would people dominate in the workplace? Since we're talking about the workplace, number one, it's the system and the structure, the way it's set up. So if you have management teams, directors, you know, like different layers of hierarchy within an organization, if it's like a triangle model, inherently there will be some power differentials, right? That will make people perhaps think they can justify this, right? So I'm a manager where I work, but because I have that title, titles, do you think titles can make some people abuse their power?
Yep, it does.
Yeah, you can say, yeah, I'm the director of whatever, or I'm manager, whatever. So I can say what, so that's a justification. So when that's the more dangerous thing. When people justify their power, then they can almost convince that person that they should tolerate the abuse. But again, it goes back to equality, right? That it doesn't matter what level you are within the organization. You could be a janitor or you could be a director. Harassment, period, is wrong, period. End of story. Correct? Nobody deserves it. And women who are marginalized, this is the interesting thing, due to race, sexual orientation, disability, grounds are particularly vulnerable. Why is that the case? Why do you think people of color, people who are new immigrants, people with disabilities, those kind of people, why are they more at risk of sexual harassment? Why do you think?
For one, they feel that they'll be judged. The other is they may never have had a chance, or they again come from a value system where they don't have the power to speak.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm seeing some good points in the chat box. Would anyone else like to participate or add? I'd love to hear from the men in this room as well. Or anyone else who'd like to speak. So why do you think it says women that are marginalized, but let's be honest, men can be marginalized as well, right? So just because I'm a man doesn't mean I'm not a new immigrant, I'm not a person of color, I might have a disability. I mean, there's many forms of oppression, correct? And so when you have multiple forms of oppression, it's that much harder for you. But point is that if you think that first of all, it's a real thing, you might have less power. That's the short answer. You have less power. And so you might fear that it won't make any difference. Even if I complain, who's going to care? If I go to the police, maybe they won't take it seriously. If I go to my manager, they might dismiss it, right? So sometimes that can happen. Any other thoughts before I change the slide?
Shanta also says that our own insecurity might give in for harassment.
Yes, it's a very, very, very good point. Yes. So we call that internalized oppression in English, right? So that means we oppress ourselves, we put ourselves down, our power down, because we start to believe what the oppressor is telling us about ourselves. So if I've been given messages from my family, from my culture, from society that, you know what, you're not valuable, like you're you're just a janitor, you're just a worker, you're just a new immigrant, you're just, you know, then I might think that, yeah, that's pretty much all I am. So maybe I'm not worthy. I don't have that value to demand respect, right? So, you know, that term is it, right? So how much do I respect myself? And how much do people respect me? Sometimes it's almost a mirror. Any comments or thoughts about that? It's a really good point. Is it Shanta? Very good point. Okay, so instead of breaking out into groups, I just thought I would, I'm going to get one of you to read out the case example, and then we'll discuss it. So I don't know if it's okay if I call out on people, or would anybody like to read who hasn't said anything yet? I'd like other people to be involved if possible. Who would like to go? Who can I pick on? How about Mr. Chauhan? Can I pick on you?
I think Tehmina raised her hand as well.
Oh, Mina? Okay, no problem.
Tehmina.
Maybe next.
Yes, I volunteered.
Okay, thank you. It's always nice. I like to hear from different people.
Hi, yes, sure. So it's a case example 1. A female graduate student has newly arrived as a refugee and is invited to discuss the possibility of working with a particular professor. Twice the meetings take place at the professor's home in a sexualized environment, including wine, romantic music, intimate discussions of a personal nature, and compliments on the woman's attractiveness. She goes along with the situation to not jeopardize her chances of getting the academic job. A tribunal decides that it should have been obvious to the professor, given the woman's vulnerability and her dependence on the professor for the academic opportunity, that his actions were not welcome to her.
Thank you for sharing that. So this is actually all the examples I'm providing today. They're all based on true life situation, based on cases that I reviewed. Any initial thoughts on this? Any initial thoughts or comments? Do you think this would happen? Or, I mean, it obviously did, but does that surprise anyone? Or
the first thought that comes in my mind is absolutely the relatability piece. I mean, I can totally relate to it. It's not something out there in the wind. It's very relatable, personally and professionally. Seen that, done that. Yeah.
wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's hard to acknowledge that, but I think the more we normalize that this does happen, that, you know, then we can say, yeah, this is outrageous. This is not okay. And I'm glad that at least they found that any reasonable person, remember, any reasonable person would think these, like wine and music and all this stuff, like clearly this is not appropriate. Right, that's what they mean by reasonable person. Any other comments, like even in the chat box, if no one's...
I have Madanji raising his hand.
Oh, sure. Hi, okay, yes, Madanji, yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, in today's society, in the colleges and in the meetings, at offices and other places, this kind of thing is reasonably common. And now, whether you jeopardizing somebody's or whether you vulnerability happens, this is the kind of thinking what you think, or you think the woman is vulnerable, or she might think if I don't take part of that, I might jeopardize my chances of getting a job. But if you go, I have seen myself gone to a open kind of interviews where there's more than one person, 10, 20 people being invited, and they have luncheons, meetings afterwards, music, and they intermingle.
That's right.
Between each other. And they also trying to say people, they're trying to judge or see or notice how social you are, maybe with your client, maybe with your other associates at the work. I mean, if there are different kind of jobs, different kind of things, all not the same and all not equal. But if a person think I'm not safe, I don't like it, I think that shouldn't go there.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're saying there's some preventative things a person can do to not put themselves in situations.
They can do it. If they don't want it, they can say so. But this is the, I mean, if there are 100 people there and one don't like it, 99 like it, what do you say to that? I mean, one could be totally vulnerable or something happen. I mean, it's not, if it's the only one female, then maybe different. But if they're 50-50, then what?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Does anybody have any alternate thoughts on this? I mean, let's take a moment and consider if this was a male graduate student. Do you think that would happen? That could happen? If it's a female professor, not that that I've engaged in anything like this before, but I'm just saying that it can happen to men too.
Yeah.
Absolutely it can, because there's still a power differential, right? So if I am still a new like refugee person in this case, I need a job, this person has the job, they have the power to give it to me, I'm scared, remember the Dara thing again, and so I will do what I think will help me. So then in some cases, it might be perceived that, well, the person also tried to use the professor to get that job and to do all that. So that person had an interest as well.
I think this does happen to men as well.
Yes.
And but nobody believes them, nobody listens to them, nobody takes seriously. Whereas for a woman, she just say that person looking at me is taken as harassment or other things, but when a man says she's touching me, doing this, nobody believes that.
Actually, I do acknowledge, and I do think it's important to reflect on that, because yes, historically people think that women are the weaker sex and that, you know, men are the perpetrators, but that's not always the case. That isn't, right? And I hope things are starting to change, but I can share that a relative of mine went through a very abusive relationship. It was a man who was being abused by the wife. And remember, abuse is not just physical, it is also emotional, psychological, economic, so many ways, right? And this was for years. He was treated horribly, like really horribly. And when he called the police laughed at him and did not take his case down. And you're right. You're absolutely right that a lot of men, unfortunately, are not believed. And that's a reality, right? But it's too simplistic to say, you know, all women do this and all men do this. Again, we're trying to go towards more gender neutral language, right? This could be anybody, regardless of their gender. Regardless, maybe they're transgendered, maybe they're not even a specific gender. It doesn't matter. You know, if somebody was a Hindra, let's say, for example, at work, and that happens, right? Like they're not a man or a woman, and they are made fun of. People laugh at them, people ridicule them. They're like, look, it looks like a man, but it's a woman, and people make jokes, right? So is that not harassment? Is that not right? So anybody who is treated not nicely it's wrong. You know, so this is very, very fruitful discussion. Any other last thoughts before I go to the next one?
I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
in those cases is just to keep the mouth shut. If somebody is talking about this gender you're talking about, that if I say something, it could be taken either against or in favor. If I keep quiet, then just say nothing, whether I like it or not, or somebody like it or not. And
so are you suggesting that that's the right thing to do, is to
well, from that personal point of view who is feeling that, I think from that point of view is the right thing not to do and not to say.
That's why the first slide was why did she not report?
Report.
Yes.
Because sometimes people think like nobody's going to believe me. Nobody cares. Nobody cares might be more accurate. Because I'm vulnerable, because I'm marginalized, that maybe nobody cares. And maybe they don't care. Like it might actually be a grain of truth to that. Right. So, but that's not why I'm here. I don't think the answer is to be silent. Because if everyone is silent, then nothing will ever change. Nothing will ever change. Then things will just stay this way. Right? Then we would not have any human rights code. We wouldn't have any way of complaining. If people weren't angry. So anger is actually important. I wanted to briefly, actually, before we go to the next slide. So I've specialized in anger management for many years. And I just think the concept is so funny, because when people think of somebody being gussa, right? Like gussa is considered almost like a bad attribute, being angry, right? But anger can be very positive. Anger is just an emotion, just like anything else, right? Even fear, we talked about fear, but fear and anger are two primitive emotions. They're survival instinct. So if somebody is going to attack me, what would I do? I could get angry and I could beat them up, right? Or I could do like Mr. Madan is saying, Mr. Chauhan saying, is just to maybe shut down and do the flight response and run away and just say, I'm not doing anything, or just freeze. So sometimes we're in shock. We don't know what to do. So we just freeze. So yeah, go ahead.
We also said you have a freedom of speech.
Yes, yes.
What's the freedom of speech? I say I don't like it or I like it.
Absolutely.
Is that the freedom of speech? The moment I say I don't like it, I'm against.
No, but
the moment I say I like it, I'm in favor.
So expressing your thoughts and feelings is a human right, correct? So if I say, I think this, I feel this, I'm speaking for myself. But it's wrong for me to say, you have to think the way I think. You must do what I say you should do. Nobody has the right to impose that on someone, right? But this is, yes, we should have free discussion, absolutely.
Then why the laws are being brought into? Laws are the ones who being brought into to make you agree to them, even you don't agree.
So who's them and who's us?
The government, the lawmakers.
Right. So not all lawmakers think the same way. I wish they did sometimes, but they don't. They actively argue with each other on things.
We have to abide by the law.
Yes. So the law, but what is the law saying here that is biased? So let's look at that. So if there's a biased law, which is possible, it needs an amendment, right? But in this case, it's saying it's a neutral thing, right? If somebody is making a complaint, any reasonable person would assume this. If there's something not objective about the law, then there's a problem. But the law is there to protect a victim, whether it's a man or a woman. It includes men. It doesn't say in the law that only females can use this law to fight against harassment. It doesn't say that. That's not what the law says.
But it doesn't say that, but this is how it's implemented.
That is not what the law says,
No,
correct?
it doesn't law say, but it
Right.
is happening.
Well, not always. So the thing is, so we have laws, right? Then we have lawyers, right? So we have a defense lawyer, we have prosecution, we have a judge. That's normally how the legal system works, correct? So you will always have somebody, even if somebody has committed a heinous crime, you will have maybe a defense lawyer who's saying, yeah, but my client is still innocent because whatever. And then the prosecutor will still try to. So what I'm saying is the debate will occur. And then it's up to the objective, the application of the law, which is supposed to be neutral and objective. Right? How things get implemented are for different reasons. So this is a good question, actually, right? And if we have time, we can maybe go into it further. I think it's a really interesting discussion. Why would maybe the law, the way it's intended to be, not be applied appropriately? And you're right, you are right, that sometimes people misuse the law. You're right, I've seen that myself. Sometimes people try to lie. I'll just be honest. Some people lie and make up stories that this person abused me when they didn't. People do that. People absolutely do that, right? But does everybody do that?
Add something here,
Of
Vinita?
course you can.
Sorry for interrupting, but
no problem.
this has been my experience while I have been doing my research on labor trafficking.
Yeah.
Especially with not only newcomers, but foreign-born individuals. That's what we call all immigrants, right?
Right.
And to add to what Madanji just mentioned, I noticed that, like you mentioned, there is hardly any reporting done because it's so people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so legislation is also not, is also not that strong where the perpetrator is punished. So, the person just gets away with it. So sometimes there are gaps in the legislation.
Yeah.
Which I think Madan uncle, that's what he's trying to say, that not always does it happen that, the person is punished for a wrongdoing.
But we have to remember that punishment is different from the law, correct? So punishment is an action, right? And it happens when you sentence. So the judge, which is actually ironically what my research thesis is on, is judicial decision-making, is you have the law, the judge looks at the law and applies the law. This is theoretical, right? Because the law is just theory. That's just words on a piece of paper. That doesn't actually have that action power to do something. But when you sentence someone, that is the power. When you sentence someone to, let's say, do anger management or to go to prison or to, whatever they tell that person to do, that is the implementation of the saza, right? But you can't just, the words can't make someone do something.
But sometimes the law is silent. It doesn't say anything. It's not explicitly said. So that is where, people take advantage of it.
Yes. So I agree. However, I also think that a lot of people don't know what their rights are.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay? So things are written just because there might be a book, but if nobody reads the book, nobody knows what it says, correct? So it might have all the very clear information. This is a question, this is just a philosophical debate here about who's at fault for things not working out. Yes, it is also the onus is on the victim to learn about their rights, to advocate for themselves, to be assertive, to communicate, but they might be scared. They might have low self-esteem. They might not have the support around them to go and do anything about it. There's a variety of reasons.
And that is why we are having sessions like this.
Yeah. But the law is not to blame in itself because the words don't do anything. you have to use the words to do something with it, correct? Like you have to apply that. How many people do that, right? So one last example, then I'll go to Mr. Chauhan, is like, if you have a divorce in this country, but you don't know that you have to be legally separated for a year before you apply for a divorce, you don't know about the right of first refusal, you don't know about custody and access, you don't know these things, right? And so how are you going to make a good decision for yourself? Even though your rights are protected and all these things, but you don't know what to access. Then we can't make it work for us, right? Go ahead, Mr. Chauhan, go ahead.
You talked about that, knowing the rights and knowing the legal rights, knowing the legal things. On the human rights, how many books are there and how many volumes of the books are there?
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
It's not one book, it's not 10 pages. It's
That's
what maybe hundreds and thousands of pages of the book.
Correct.
Who is reading all that?
That's true. It's not accessible. That's a really good point, actually. It's not very accessible.
Even accessible.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, I said something to you. Where do I find which law is applied and how do it happen?
Yeah, yeah. And this is another really good point that you're making, is when we're looking at who gets more not just access to rights, but we have to think about economics, right? So if I have money to hire a lawyer to explain to me what my rights are, even though I haven't read all these books, but they can say, look, based on your case, I can get you this, this, this. I need money for that lawyer, right? So people who are poor and marginalized don't have that. And so they might also be afraid of, that's why the law did change in 1990s. They actually changed the law for domestic abuse anyhow, where you don't need a lawyer to press charges. So if you press charges, then the crown is sort of the government takes over your case, and they will assign a lawyer to defend, to help you. And so that changed because they noticed that not everybody has the money to go through with all the proceedings, right? But if it's a case of abuse, child abuse, anything like that, there are systems in place to help with that. But no, it's a capitalism thing. It's a self-esteem thing. It's about so many things, so many layers of things, right? Why people don't report, why it's not believed, why is it not followed through with? There's so many explanations.
It's also the interpretation of what you see.
Everything is interpretation. Everything is interpretation. That's why we started the conversation saying whose glasses, whose perspective. But number one, the law, the function of the law is to have something on paper that people can read it and hopefully they will interpret it the same way, which we know is not true. Because we can all read the same sentence and maybe somebody's going to pull different pieces from that or get a different visual. So when I said the word reasonable person, remember?
Yes.
For one person, reasonable is different for another person. You know, if I say abuse, I did a project for talking about abuse in the South Asian community years ago. And it was so interesting because I asked people, what does abuse mean? And there was no word. Like, what's the lafaz that you would use to say abuse? So people were trying to draw pictures and images of what abuse looked like. And it was similar to what we were talking about in terms of aggression. But it was more like a physical, you know, like it wasn't like it could be psychological, it could be economic, it could be silence.
Abuse could also be kisi da fayda uthana.
Oh, totally.
Kisi di kamzori da fayda uthana. Khas karke kisi di kamzori da fayda uthana.
Absolutely. Yep. Bribery, control, greed, power. Kuch bhi ho sakta hai. Even elder abuse is unfortunately quite common now, right? People never talked about it before, right? But you know, if you know, the parents are living with the kids and they have their own kids and they look at them as like burdens sometimes, and maybe they're extorting their pension money and they're not giving them food and they're not treating them properly. Like these, sadly, elder abuse is very big problem, right? But seniors, how many of them will say, yeah, I'm going to put a case against my kids? कौन करेगा इसमें, right? ज़्यादातर लोग चुप रहते हैं ना?
Probably none.
And they live that way because where else are they going to go? They tell me as a social मैं कितने जाएंगे when like की कर सकना, right? Like I came to Canada to live with my children and now they treat me this way, but what choice do I have? What options do I have? And same with those like Dashita, I'm sure you see with the laborers that people are exploited. Like what choice do they have? Like they wanted to come to Canada. Mana international students now come see, like I used to be a teacher and I remember the students saying like paise like so much money to come here to do school and to make their parents proud of them, and everything is so expensive that some of the ladies, especially in my class, but there was even one male who said that they're engaged in trafficking, right? Like they are in strip clubs and they do these kind of things, right? So that they have time to study. Because sometimes they would come to my class very late. I said, why are you late again? And they say, I was working all night. So at first I thought they were joking, but they really opened up and they said, no, like you know, they don't want to give them parents stress because when they come to Canada, their lifestyle is going to be good. And they didn't know how expensive it was to live here and how difficult it is here. And so, matlab, it's very sad, right? Like, mushkil na, you know, you have to do these things, sadly. So when you don't have options, my point is, when you're oppressed and you're marginalized, and let's say this person, the previous example, the professor is there, can give a job, can give power to this person, that person doesn't have power. And then you think, okay, maybe if I just am with this person, you know, consent, you say, okay, tika, right? You don't want to, but what choice do you have? So people might say yes, but not because they happily say yes, but because koi choice nahi hai na, right? So consent is a very complicated thing. Very complicated. Okay, so example 2. Koi aur pad sakta this example?
I can read it.
Acha, who is it? Oh, no, I want somebody else.
I think
Okay.
Brinder ji, you raise her hand. Yeah,
Acha.
Brinder ji raised her hand.
Okay, Vinderji.
Yeah. Case example 2. An employee compliments his female co-worker on her appearance one morning as they stand beside the elevator. Objectively, the comment would not be known to be unwelcome. She thanks him and does not indicate any discomfort with this comment. If a human rights claim arose due to this one instance, it would not amount to sexual harassment or a poisoned environment.
Okay. So what's the difference between this case and the last one? The last one was like obvious, overt. And so what facts here? And again, if I was a judge, I would just look at the facts on the paper, right? Because that's how they weren't there. The judge wasn't there. Only those 2 people were there. So if this is the evidence that came in front of me as a judge, I'm going to say, okay, well, he complimented on appearance, but that's pretty normal. Even women compliment, oh, I love your sari, I love your, like, you look pretty, like that's normal, right? Like it's not an unusual thing. It's not necessarily flirtatious. And it was a one incident. right? And it didn't look like she was uncomfortable. So if this case happened, which it could happen, right? Like people can turn around and say, hey, you know, he complimented me or she complimented me. Like, so what does that mean? What does that mean? Right? So everybody sees that this is very different. Okay, last case, last example.
I
Who
think
can-
it's again the compliment how the recipient take it.
Yeah.
And if she says it's nothing, it's okay, then that's okay. And if she want to make a big thing out of it, she can.
She can, but in the court, it wouldn't stand up. It wouldn't hold
Well,
up.
it probably wouldn't stand up, but she can still raise it.
She can. Oh, everyone has a right to sue someone, to do a lawsuit. Anyone can complain, but then at the end of the day, it's the judge who makes the decision, right? So, okay, Koi, I want somebody else here.
Harsha wanted to.
Harsha ji,
Harsha, yeah, go ahead.
You are muted, Harsha ji.
Oh,
A manager repeatedly comments on female staff members' appearance during an important business meeting. Her ability to take part as an equal in the meeting is undermined, but she does not want to make a scene. She therefore runs for the meeting while ignoring the manager's inappropriate comments. She later files a complaint. In this case, the comments were clearly unwelcome and would amount to sexual harassment, even though the woman has not overtly objected.
okay, so this example now. Any comments or thoughts about this? I mean, so I think it's uncomfortable if you're in a group and somebody keeps talking about your appearance in front of your colleagues, right? It's a little uncomfortable. So it's not a shock that she would be quiet, right? Because then it could be raised in court that, well, why didn't she say anything like right away that stop doing this? Well, first of all, it's a manager, so it's a power differential, right? And then it's in front of people, so it's embarrassing. So when they see a reasonable person, those are the things that the judge has to think about when they're making their decision. Any questions or thoughts or comments about this one? No?
Complaining in HR?
Complaining? Oh, can't hear you.
Vinita, I have a question.
Sure.
It's a comment that you look so sexy. And for some people, it's very normal. They compliment like this, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Is it normal? Because people say that it's normal in Canadian culture. This is how you compliment.
It's a very good question. So number one factor for a judge would be, what is the status of this relationship? You know, so sometimes between friends, you know, Mazaknal, they make certain common jokes to each other. Oh, hey, sexy, hey, this. This is how their normal communication is. So if it's a part of the norm and it's an existing relationship, they might think it's nothing, right? But if it is a power differential, if it's a out of the blue comment, if you don't know this person, it's a stranger, they might say this is not a reasonable thing, right? So that is one take on it. Any other thoughts about this? A very good question. Very good
So
question.
let's say it's a colleague, right?
Yeah.
And he compliments like this to everyone.
Okay. So that's his normal.
For him, it's normal. But maybe for the other person who is from a different culture, it's not normal.
Correct. So was it a first time incident? So this is, I'm just going through what a judge would go through. So they would say, is it, you know, the first time it caught you off guard? He said, hey, sexy. It's the first time you're meeting him. He's never talked to you like this, but way before. Did you say, I'm sorry, but this is uncomfortable? Remember, harassment means if the person keeps bugging you, right? Even though you've said stop. So if it's a repeated incident more than once, then that is a problem.
Right. And maybe for some person, as I said, that it's normal for them.
Yeah.
They know that person.
Totally.
Okay, so he is like this, he always compliments them.
Yeah.
But the new person,
Yeah.
and maybe she will say that I'm not comfortable.
Yeah.
Or maybe she's new.
Yeah.
And she was just feeling uncomfortable and not expressing herself.
Sure.
But she was telling to her colleagues,
That can happen.
I'm not comfortable with this thing, right?
Of course. Yeah. Very,
I just wanted to know that how
Totally.
people take it.
Yeah, totally. And that can happen anywhere, even in like in India, people like, you know, like any culture, if you are a friendly person, some people are like that. They're very loud, they're very friendly. I had a lady who I used to work with who just gives hugs to everybody. It's just, but here people have this thing about personal space, they call it, right? So even here, they're like, this is not normal. Or I've seen men holding hands and they go, that's kind of strange, but it's normal. Like a lot of Indian men hold hands. I mean, they like certain things are culturally specific, but you have to think about the context, number one. Okay, so is this a professional environment? Is this just a, you know, you're at a restaurant and in a more relaxed environment? So look at those environmental factors. They look at the existing relationship of the person. So there are a lot of different things that are considered when rendering a decision. But then again, which is what my thesis is on, do all judges think the same? No, because judges are people too. And judges come from their own cultures and their own backgrounds and everything. So my whole point of my research study is to look at how do we standardize certain things in judicial decision making, regardless of culture. What is like human, like on a human level, just wrong? You know, like if somebody says, please, not girl, and you still do it, like that's wrong. Like it's just no. Right? So I think some things are more human and some things are more cultural, but I think it's great that we do have the Ontario Human Rights Codes. The employer now is required by law, and if it's found that they are not doing something to accommodate their employees, they get in trouble. And again, this happened because a lot of people complained and they were angry and they said, no, this is not going to happen. And if collectively enough people say no, what happens? Laws change. Society hopefully changes. The way we think about things changes. But if we stay silent, it doesn't change, you know? When you talk about something, what I love to do is support groups, because I find people say, hey, this happened to me. You know, the Me Too movement, that was a good example. Then other people say, well, this happened to me too. This happened to me too. And if men, just to go back to Mr. Chauhan, is if men also had support groups, which is needed. And they said, you know what, I was also treated wrong, you know, and this happened to me, and my concerns were not taken seriously by the police. Enough men should come together, not just men, but women should be mad about this too. Everybody should be mad when somebody's human rights are not dignified. That's just wrong. So workplace accommodations. So what does accommodation mean? What's our language interpretation for accommodation? How would you say accommodation in Hindi or Punjabi or Urdu? What is the word for that?
Urdu में कहते हैं रियायत देना.
But that's more like advice, na? Like that's not.
No.
Oh.
रियायत होता है kind of concession.
Concession. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's you are making accommodation कि आप
इस
उनके
जगह
लिए कुछ adjustment करते
जगह
हैं.
जगह
इन पंजाबी हिंदी जगह और
जगह
स्थान
कहते हैं accommodation
Jaga matlab space, na? Like you're
space
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 yeah,
space.
but space, I guess
Yes.
it's a close translation, sort of.
Yes.
Yeah. So some of these concepts are abstract. So I think it's important to think about how we would interpret this. So accommodation is a way of removing. So like you're right. So sort of jaga banani hai, right? For preventing persons identified by the code for grounds for fully taking part in the workplace. So fully taking part means being able to do my job without fear, without worry, without that stress, without that tension, being able to just do what I'm supposed to do at work. Then it's the duty of the employer to accommodate because it's their workplace and they are responsible, just like any liability insurance, they are responsible for their human resources. That's a huge statement. And what is challenging right now, I can speak for this myself because I'm a manager as well for a community health center. But what's tricky now post-COVID is a lot of people are working from home. So tell me something, can harassment, bullying, aggression, any of these things, can they happen even if people are working remotely online?
Yes.
How?
It does happen.
Can you give me an example of what that would look like?
So even when I'm working from home, I'm still working, right?
Yeah.
I would not be there if I was not working. So if someone say it's a meeting going on and someone says something which is not very appropriate, or I'm asking for an accommodation, say I have a small child,
Yeah.
and I need to take care of the child, of my child, though I'm working from home. If that could also be, I mean, if I'm given that accommodation, good. If I'm not given that
Okay.
accommodation, that could also be.
Okay, so you're talking about accommodation. I appreciate that because the slide says accommodation. My question was, can somebody be harassed and abused and go through those
yes.
kinds of things even though they're not physically in the same space as the perpetrator?
Absolutely. Say again, going back to my earlier example of a meeting.
Yeah.
If in a meeting I have a colleague or a boss who constantly is saying things which you had one of those examples, the
Yeah.
third one, which where or someone was mentioning that if someone keeps saying something which is not appropriate, I don't like it.
Yeah.
That can be harassment, even if I'm working from home.
And it can be an email, right?
Yeah.
It can be through Zoom. It could be any way. Some people harass people on social media. People follow people. People like say all these comments and put things on their post, on their wall. People are getting harassed every day, right? So harassment can still happen. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. It's not just a physical contact thing. So employers at the workplace, the reason why I mentioned about all of this is because it's hard for employers to manage this sometimes when the employees are not at work. So they can't actually see what harassment is going on unless you save the emails. Remember I said emails, please record things in emails, send the message. If you get a reply back that says some things that maybe you can kind of build up a case for yourself to show your employer, look at the types of things that this person is saying to me, that's sending me these messages, and look at the time. Because when you send email, it shows the time that you sent the message. Oh, look, 10:23 p.m. He's still asking me questions about this. and he sent me 3 messages. So voicemail, all of these things, keep track of it. And so what is the employer responsible for though? Is it just during the work hours? This is a thing to think about. Is it just like 9 to 5 and then, okay, 6 o'clock you get harassed? You know, because people are working now from home, right? So they may be working at different hours. They may not be working the 9 to 5. If it's not during their work time, is that not accommodation for the employer? Like, I don't know. These are really interesting, important questions to think about. So some obvious examples of what accommodation looks like that are clear examples, those are kind of more abstract examples, is like providing equipment. So if I have a disability, I can't see very well, you know, or maybe have back pain, constant back pain, having like a standing up like computer desk. I think we talked about flexible time policies. Sometimes employers implement those for family obligations. Modifying uniforms. Let's say you wear buggery and like, you know, they're saying, no, you're required to wear a helmet, and those kind of religious accommodations. You know, so different types of things can be considered accommodation. Where it becomes tricky is, like I said, people are working from home. You can't see what's happening. It's kind of like the judge who hears things and then has to process and has to take the law and apply the law and figure out who's right, who's wrong, what's the punishment, what should be implemented, and all of that. So one thing most workplaces do is they have a complaint report system, and that's really, really important. And it should be anonymous, actually, ideally, at first, because people should feel comfortable coming forward. They don't maybe not want their name put there. But let's say as an initial step, all employers should have a complaint filing system that people know. So once they're oriented and trained, once I'm a new employee, new hire, they have to tell me by law that if they have a sexual harassment policy, they have to have one now. And violence prevention and health and safety. All of these policies, they are required by law to make the employee read it. They might just say, hey, read this and sign it. So hopefully people do read it and sign it, but they should be getting some orientation or training around that. They should know where they should file the reports, what the investigation process is, what their rights are. They have to be told that stuff up front. Okay. The tricky thing again is maybe, let's say, I mean, this is not an exact example. Let's say I have a disability, or I don't want the employer to know because I think the employer might judge me. So how can I get an accommodation if I don't tell them what I need? Right. So again, the onus is also on the victim or the person who is trying to access the rights, because you have to advocate for yourself in this world. Even if it's to a doctor, if the doctor is not referring you to a specialist, but you know you're not feeling right, you have to be on your doctor and say, look, I'm not feeling right. You need to refer me to a specialist. You have to fight for yourself. Only then will something happen. So I just, think that's an important piece. So I just want to kind of summarize some of our key points here. I'm actually going to stop my screen. Just wanted to gather back with everyone. I asked you to consider power. And I want to kind of revisit that and revisit the concept of equality, because we started with both of those terms. Are equality and power opposing terms, or are they somehow related? Power and equality.
I think it could be opposing or it could be enforcing each other depending on the situation.
Right. Right.
Like when I say opposing, in the last example you talk about the accommodations, an employer, in this case I'm talking about let's say a military type employment. They have the power, they have the rules and regulation to apply in the battlefield ever there.
Yeah.
And women have the equal right to be a soldier.
Mhm.
But if she's saying I have to feed my child there,
Right.
that's not going to be acceptable. In
Well,
those
they
cases,
have to
they
make
should do that.
accommodations that, yeah. So when the act of making an accommodation is to give somebody more power, right? So nobody in this world starts at the same level. I wish they did. I mean, it would be fantastic if we started at the same level, but we don't. Some people have more barriers in life. Some people have more opportunities in life. Some people have access to money, power, resources, supports, right? So we're all at different playing fields. Nobody's here. Not everyone's here. So when some people have less, okay, to bring people up here so that they have a little bit more power, sometimes the government gives us, or employer gives us, a little bit extra attention, accommodation perhaps, so that we get enough power that we are on the same playing field as other people. So that's a philosophical debate. Some people, it's controversial, right? So right now we're going through a time when affirmative action, have you heard of affirmative action? So that's a big policy. Before, historically, a lot of people of color did not get jobs for obvious reasons. And so is it right that if I have two candidates in front of me that I choose the one that is a person of color over a white person just for their race? Because historically people have not had those opportunities. Is that right? Or not, right? And so I mean, we have to be very careful when we do accommodation to make sure it makes sense, right? So as a baseline, yes, if they were both equally educated, both had the same skills and competencies, and one person happens to be this color and one person is this color, one person is this, then okay, we can justify it, right? But ideally there should be some,
right?
huh?
Racism.
Yeah, it could be racism. So again, what's the difference between prejudice and discrimination? Actually, I don't think we discussed this yet. So prejudice means prejudging. So I'm assuming certain things about you before I've even talked to you. Like I come with my own biases and beliefs. Maybe I was raised to think that way. Maybe my personal experience. That can happen. It's a trauma thought, right? So let's say I had an abusive husband. And so now I think all men are terrible. That is that's wrong, right? Because that is judging all men based on one experience. That is not okay, right? And people might do that with, let's say they were robbed by somebody who happened to be a certain background. They think, well, all those people are thieves, right? So people do that. People do have prejudice, right? The discrimination aspect is now acting on the bias. So I am justifying, well, I was robbed by this person, so therefore, or I was, abused by this person, so therefore all of those people are X. Then if I start acting on that, if I don't hire that person because of that thing, then that is an act of discrimination, right? So they're related, but they're different. So my point is the power comes in not just our actions. Our actions are actually sentencing someone, making sure, trying to use our power to make them do something. That is enforcing power. That's a action. But it starts with here. It starts with how we think, how we perceive the world. And that's why I was talking about those bigger spiritual things in the beginning, because we are all the same, right? Not just my belief, but this is true actually. Diversity exists in every species, every culture, everything, right? And so it doesn't matter. The point is human rights. Not gender rights, but human rights are everyone's rights. And that is something that we're born with. if it's our conditioning, our cultural conditioning, or whatever, that might affect the way that we access those rights, access those privileges, but it doesn't mean we're not entitled. And I think the first part of empowerment is to let people, help people, if you can, to know that they're worthy. They're worthy of having their self heard and accessing their human rights. But then a part of empowerment is not doing it for them. It's not saying, oh, let me help you to get a lawyer and let me help you to. Yes, it's nice if you give them resources, but don't hold their hand throughout the whole time. You have to teach them to do it themselves, right? I want you to make that phone call. I want you to follow up, right? Because people have to learn. It's a training. You have to learn how to do something to be independent. If you teach dependency, that's not empowerment. That's not empowerment, right? So I just sort of want to leave you with that thought, is that, you know, I hope this was helpful in some way. I hope that it shed some light on, you know, basically our law in Canada, but I think really it's based on human rights, which is regardless of country or culture or religion or anything. It's pretty much, I think it's important to have a standard, but then it's the application of the standard. Yes, there's no guarantees how things play out. There are many factors, but certainly if you know your rights and you empower others to access their rights, they will have more power to advocate for themselves. So hopefully justice can be served. But justice is, in our mind, a theory. It is not necessarily something that we know for certain will happen. But if we don't try, then nothing will change. So I just want to leave you with that. I would love it to just have a short check-in with everyone. If there are any questions or thoughts or feelings that have come up with you. And if you haven't seen the power and control wheel, I encourage you to just type in Google power and control wheel and go to images. And, you know, if anyone even has that right now, if you can put that up on your screen and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's so many ways.
So, Vinita, after every session, I make a WhatsApp group.
Perfect.
I send them a survey.
Nice.
And then they fill the survey. So I will send that power and control wheel
Thank
in
you.
that group.
That's great. That's great.
If you want to be, I can add you in. It's a temporary group.
Sure.
When everybody just fill, they leave the group.
I would love that. That would be wonderful.
Sometimes they want to have some comments, some questions with the presenter. So it's a good way that's how we do it.
Because this is so nuanced. There's so much to this topic, so many layers. That sometimes after you go away from the workshop, you're like, oh my gosh, like I want to talk about this. This is what's come up for me and everything. So then, I love answering questions. I love challenging questions. I love debates. I think it's so good. So it's good for our mind, our soul, and we're being honest then, right? If people don't ask questions, then I'm concerned. Questions are important.
Yeah, and I think that these kind of courageous conversation should be on every table. Many people, they don't know, because I work with newcomers, and one of the reasons they don't know, that's why Malton Women Council is offering these kind of programs.
Amazing.
It is live, it is on our social media, it is on our YouTube, so people can know what is available over there. Especially with newcomers, they have very limited knowledge about the services, about the resources, they don't know their rights here.
Of course.
Just an example, that our school in back home, they are teacher-centered school. Here they are student-centered, and people, they don't know.
That's right, yeah.
So this is a basic thing, and I think that we should have more discussions like that. Vinita, thank you so much. I think everybody, I'm looking at 18 people are still here.
Yeah. What are you showing?
Yes,
Yes,
power
control wheel. Yeah, that's right. That's awesome. If I can make a suggestion, one other thought I had, one thing I like to do in my classroom is throw up like a word. No explanation, but the word, like, let's talk about respect today, right? So what does respect look like in India might be different from what respect looks like here, you know, from a cultural perspective. I think that's important because when I've done talks to an Indian audience, people are showing, like, going like this, showing respect. And here it's like student-centered, like you said, like, you know, it's just my teacher or whatever. There's not that same level of respect, even for elders, right? Like for seniors, for, you know, talking with like, more like they have wisdom, they have knowledge, they have their, you know, in our culture, there's more value, I think, as opposed to here. So there are differences when we think about respect and how to show respect.
Yes.
So I think that would be a wonderful conversation, just to throw out that word. And thinking about now Valentine's Day. So it's the last thing I'll say is I thought about Valentine's Day, and usually people associate that with romantic love and just like a partner. But to me, especially as you know, I'm single and I am more of a worldly person, I would say. When I think of the concept of love, I think you can love anyone, regardless of gender or anything. And love is a feeling. And I feel I love everyone here because you're so honest and open, and your heart is open, your heart chakra is open, right? So it's like an energy that we share from a spiritual level, from a higher level. So it's not down here love, it's up here love. And that is spiritual love. And I think if more people have that mindset that we're all in it together, right? We're all here on the planet together, there would be no discrimination. There wouldn't be a desire to oppress people and have power over people and hurt people, because you're like, you know what? I'm hurting myself. When I hurt you, I hurt me. So I can't handle when I hear anyone in pain. It affects me physically, even though I don't know someone. I watch on the news, somebody got shot, this happened, that happened. I don't know the person, but I cry for them. I pray for them. And I hope that more people can have that mindset, right? So that's what I want to leave you with. Any other comments or thoughts or anything before we end for today? And thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here in your presence, and thank you for inviting me. And you know,
can I ask one question in the end, please?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, my question was then when you were talking about the human rights, whether these human rights are, and you were specifically mentioning about the Ontario human rights.
Right, because that's based on where we live, yes.
So are these human rights are different from the UN human
good question. So
human rights or the constitutional rights? So this was my
very, very good question. So it first began in 1940s, where it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is basically the United Nations created a charter for human rights. And so that, as you know, the UN is basically an amalgamation of countries around the world that agreed on these terms of reference. This happened after the Second World War, and they said, you know, no more war, never again, which obviously didn't follow through on, but that's another story. So anyways, from that, different countries took the human rights to their countries, right? So Canada also got the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that was in 1982 or something. I think our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms came about, and that's the federal level, right? So that's a federal charter. From there, every province uses human rights legislation that's embedded, right? So it goes from the global universal charter to national, and then to provinces, right? And then based on that, it gets implemented, hopefully again, into practice in a municipal or a local level.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chauhan?
You mentioned during the talk thoughts and feelings.
Yes.
What's more important and how they influence each other?
It's a very, very good question. So people are now talking about emotional intelligence. Some people see it as a female quality, a feminine quality, to be more in tune with feelings rather than thinking. But I think that's a stereotype as well, right? So I think we're just conditioned to think that because men have feelings too, right? And women have thoughts too. So I think it's more the masculine and the feminine. I think those energies reside in all human beings, from a spiritual perspective. And so there is not one that's more important than the other. The emotional is the more unobstructed part of us, right? So in psychology, I hope you don't mind if I'm going off topic, we talk about from a psychodynamic perspective, the id equals superego. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those concepts, but the id is more like our natural tendencies. When we're born as kids, we want things. We're selfish. We want what feels good. We don't care about what society says. We're not conditioned, right? So that is like full human rights. You know, I want this, I'm going to get this. So people are naturally born to be intuitive with their feelings as kids. And then as we grow up, we get conditioned to think, oh, if I do this, I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get disciplined. You know, what will people say about me? What will people think about me? So we start to develop that consciousness, right? And that social conditioning that is away from our human nature. Our human nature is actually meant to be free because we're spirit, right? So we're free. Our Atma is free, right? But the conditioning brings us down. And so what is better? I don't know. If you think of emotionality and intuition and those things as our natural, authentic self, maybe the intellect is all human conditioning, and maybe that's not as superior. But then if we don't have thoughts about consequences, then we get in trouble, right? So we do need our intellect to protect us from making mistakes and not just doing whatever we want. But that free spirit, it should be encouraged to come out too, right? So for example, if my parents say, you know what, I was fortunate, my parents said, do whatever you want. You want to be a social worker, you want to be a creative artist, just do whatever you want. Some parents say, no, you have to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer. You have to marry this kind of person. You have to do, there's a lot of like restrictions, right? So the person who's conditioned will say, yeah, I should do this. I have to do this. I must do this. These are the consequences. The emotional is like, I just want to do what feels good, right? So what is more superior? I don't know. I mean, that's really an interesting debate. Yes.
So, Vinita, I think that we will invite you for this discussion
Sure.
in some other session.
There's no end to this discussion.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I'm open to all ideas, but that's just my take on it.
That's wonderful, because we do have these kind of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We have a program for creative expression known as Ru Se Ru Tak.
Oh, beautiful. So nice.
And you're so right. Our soul has no gender, no age,
no ego, actually, no ego, no power thing, no power issue, right? Then you're like low, like you're not evolved. Last point from Karen. I see your head up. And then, go ahead, Karen.
Hi, everyone. And hi, Vinita. Thanks a lot, Uzma, again, for arranging something great where people can get information. Vinita, thanks for presenting. I really, admire the way you have shared this information and you touch on everything. And yes, working as a psychotherapist, I see my own clients struggling with, you see so many cases, coming, and there are layers involved, as you mentioned. There is no information, no awareness. People might miss on the details. And then when they end up going to stress leave or, with their own health issues, when they start dealing with that I cannot take this harassment anymore.
Yeah.
There is the point when they start looking for the legal help or
Yeah.
something. And there is, and by that time, they find out that there is no way because there is no case. They have never complained. They never talk about that. They were not aware. So I'm glad that at some point we are arranging this at the community level to spread the word.
Yeah. Prevention is the key, because when you get to a point, anger takes you so far, but anger burns you out very quickly. Anger is a power, right? Like think of Durga, right? So anger can help you to like, I need justice, I need this, but then you will get exhausted and drained. And especially if you don't have support. So it's better to know first. You might not be in that situation now, but don't be like a crisis thing. And as soon as, okay, now what are we going to do, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So do you think any more policies coming up, at HR level where, as you mentioned, do not only sign, it needs to be, at some point that where more training for the new hire staff, or more conversation about it. So people are more aware. Once you give awareness, automatically, those cases might start going down to some extent.
Yeah. No, for sure.
As well as their,
I think it depends on the workplace, just to answer your question, because the unfortunate problem is a lot of workplaces, they don't have the human resources, they don't have time, they don't have money. I know it sounds really bad, but it's true. They might say, we don't have anyone to orient or train this person. Here, read this policy manual, sign it. Right? Most of the HR managers don't go through the documents, make sure that people understand, check in with them regularly. Managers, it depends. You could have a great manager. I hope I am. And I check in with my staff and say, how's everything going? Is everything okay? Because I know if they have a good relationship with me, that they will come and talk to me if something is troubling them. But sometimes if the manager is not approachable, not available, they may not come and report anything. So there are dynamics there too, right? And so, we can say, but how does the law make an employer do anything? Only if they make checks regularly, like, are you checking on your employees? Are you doing this? Like, of course they'll say, yes, of course I am, right? But how do you make sure? How do you enforce things? So I think that's a big thing we've, like, just to end off this discussion, talked about today. There's a difference between law and difference between enforcement.
Yeah.
Okay? The law is not evil. Law is neutral. It's just words on a piece of paper. To bring the words to life, you need lawyers, you need judges, you need people to understand the law, to apply the law, and to follow through with the law. But the law is not bad or good in itself. It's what we do with the law, just like the computers and the social media and everything. Nothing is good or bad. It's what we do with it. Okay, so I'll leave you off on that note.
I agree. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Toshita,
बहुत अच्छा
for
session
hosting.
रहा.
Thank you so much. Wonderful session.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Toshita and Vinita.
Thank you. Will you share the
Thank
link? You'll share the link with us, and
I will
Great.
definitely.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you.